from spaces of memory to places of memory.
I'm convinced that humanities, cultural studies and theology can never completely disregard the concrete places and contexts in which they are conducted. This is all the more true when we speak of spaces of memory. When we talk of spaces of memory, we must also connect them to places of memory. For this reason, my colleague Rudolf Kaisler and I decided to talk about the city of Vienna as a place of memory and remembrance. Of course, we will also make reference to film. In fact, one of the most famous films about Vienna begins with the admission to have no memory of the Vienna of earlier times. In the opening narration of The Third Man, the narrator, the director Carol Reed, speaks in the first sentence of a rupture of memory. This rupture corresponds to the images of the destroyed city of Vienna after the Second World War. Admittedly, a somewhat ironic tone soon interferes. I'm sure you all know this opening scene. Modern Viennese film starts with a rupture of memory. However, the film that follows, as we have seen, is a great document of Vienna, an archive of pictures of post-war Vienna. It has transmitted to generations a memory of the city of Vienna immediately after the Second World War. Second, cities as long-lasting carriers of human memory. The two long-lasting bearers of human memory are cities and writing. As this conference has a focus on special issue, has a focus on film, we refer to the city in the following. Today, well over half of all people in the world live in cities, and the trend is rising. We do not know of an alternative to urban cohabitation. Cities, with their basic elements and functions, are among the longest enduring achievements of humanity. There are cities with continuous settlement over millennia, for example, Damascus. Jan Pieper gives a short summary of the continuity of the concept of the city. He writes, "Since the second millennium BC, there have been well-ordered street systems, often laid out like a chessboard, and thus the Mesopotamian city has become a large-scale architectural form in terms of outline figure, internal structure, and city silhouette, which needs to be explained and read. From now on, the ancient Oriental city is no longer only a settlement, dwelling, and means of subsistence, but also, and that's important, a representation and interpretation of existence. It has become a symbolic form with which the human explains himself, herself, and his, her role in the visible as well the imagined world. Cities bear a long memory and are constantly being recharged with significance. With Marc Augé, we can say that cities are anthropological places that fulfill a triple function. People want them to be places of identity, of relations, and of history. Cities, therefore, offer a long memory. Unless they are not completely destroyed or abandoned, they remain even if national or imperial borders change. People's habitats are much more oriented towards cities than towards countries or territories. These are places where all cyclically repetitive routines and the memories they carry occur. Every large city is a world and even a recapitulation, a summary of the world with its ethnic, cultural, religious, social, and economic diversity, as Marc Augé states. Klaus Heinrich, a German philosopher in Berlin, Klaus Heinrich goes even further when he says about wandering through a city, when looking at the buildings, some of which are old, some of which are outrageously new, one also comes to grasp, to some extent, the history of the species that one carries forward. Cities are places of memory and remembrance. In 3 steps, we present the city of Vienna as an archive of a long-lasting but fragile and contested memory. Fragility and contestation that permeate even long-lasting forms of memory. Perhaps this illustrates the paradoxical structure of memory. In the following, we can only offer a glimpse into the landscape of the city of Vienna. However, this could be an invitation to ask ourselves what kind of memory certain places can stimulate. Can we, as interpreters, give them discernment and differentiation? The Votivkirche as a place of manifold memory, first step. The Votivkirche, consecrated in 1879, planned by Heinrich Ferstel, is a famous church right in the neighborhood of the main building of the University of Vienna. When you will leave the university, you will see the Votivkirche on the left-hand side. In many ways, it can be read as a place of memory and remembrance. It was built as a token of gratitude for the failure of an assassination attempt on Emperor Franz Joseph. You spoke about him. Yes. The start of the construction of the Votivkirche in 1856 coincided with the demolition of the city walls that had surrounded the inner city. With the emperor's permission, the church was the first building to be erected on the open area of the glacis, which at that time was still subject to a construction ban for military reasons. A little later, with its repeal, the way was cleared for the building of the Ringstraße. So the Votivkirche carries the memory of a large program of reconstructing the city. Built in neo-Gothic style, the Votivkirche, like all the other classicistic buildings of the Ringstraße, reminds us of an old style normally employed centuries ago. For example, the University of Vienna, the main building where we are in, is built in this neo-Renaissance style, and for the cathedral, they chose the neo-Gothic style. The neo-Gothic Votivkirche was built as a counterpart to the Gothic Stephansdom. In the Allgemeine Bauzeitung of 1886, it says about the image of the Votivkirche: "What is certain is that it is engraved in the heart and mind of every Viennese as the second beloved landmark of the beloved hometown, next to the lofty and boldly towering time-honored Stephansdom." Just as St. Stephan's Cathedral is the church of Vienna and the Viennese, the Votivkirche was intended as the cathedral of the monarchy, a cathedral of nations uniting the peoples of the Danube monarchy. As the Foundation Charter states, it was to be a monument of gratitude to the latest grandchildren of all the peoples of this vast empire, the second largest empire of the time in Europe. All the countries of the Danube monarchy and their patron saints are depicted in the paintings and on the glass windows of the church. Here another very interesting picture of the Votivkirche. This is the main building of Vienna University, where we are in. And here you can see the glass windows, and the program of these windows is dedicated to all the countries, to the nations, to the peoples of the monarchy. All of them are represented in this church. Their memories should have a place of representation in the capital of Vienna. Following the example of Westminster Abbey and other famous churches, the Votivkirche was also to take on the function of an Austrian Hall of Fame. The church was planned as a place of remembrance par excellence, but it neither gained that unifying function nor did it become the memorial place of the monarchy. As a masterpiece of neo-Gothic architecture, however, it represents the culmination of Vienna's neoclassical church buildings and has thus become a place of remembrance in a different way than intended. This shows the fragility of memory associated with a great building, a fragility that will accompany us on our short tour of Vienna. When the church was finished, the tensions in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy were already that strong that it could never have this unifying function as the people who planned it had thought initially. Public space is a place of contested memory, second step. For a long time, a city's culture of remembrance clung to monuments erected in public space. In recent decades, this practice has shifted to giving a city a memory through art and artistic intervention in public space. Increasingly, public space is being thematized as a space of contested memory. In many cities today, this leads to the question of how to deal with monuments to people involved in colonial history, fascism, anti-Judaism, communism, National Socialism, or totalitarian ideologies in general. Before handing over to my colleague Rudolf Kaisler, I would like to take you to the currently most controversial place of remembrance in Vienna, the monument of former mayor Karl Lueger at Karl-Lueger-Platz in the inner city. The moderation of the discussion and of reshaping the place has been handed over to the Department of Art in Public Space. Here you can see the mayor, Karl Lueger. And I will read what this Department of Art in Public Space wrote about this monument, about the place, and about this artistic intervention. The monument to commemorate Vienna's mayor, Karl Lueger, erected in 1926, who held office from 1897 to 1910, is highly controversial among the public today, and not without reason. Karl Lueger skillfully managed to build up an unprecedented cult around his person and captivated people as a modernizer and advocate of the little people. With radical racist rhetoric and ruthless populism, he turned anti-Semitism into a political program. With the installation Lueger Temporär, Nicole Six and Paul Petrich extended the discussion about the monument to other traces of Lueger in the city. They measured and documented commemorative signs from busts to plaques that can be found in Vienna and are dedicated to Lueger. 16 of these signs were gathered on Luegerplatz in the form of their outlines in original size. There you can see the shapes of these other monuments of Karl Lueger. Here, they are now temporarily stored as a public archive. It is a kind of temporary memory storage system that shows us how Karl Lueger inscribed himself in the memory of the city of Vienna in many places. The public is provided with a symbolic display warehouse that illustrates the process of ordering and structuring as a necessary basis for forming opinions. The artists thus invite a public process of reflection that can be thought beyond the square and be the starting point for public discussions or further artistic interventions. They expand the specific questions raised by the memorial to an overarching one. How do we, as a society, want and should deal with our historically burdened heritage today? This is the model of the artistic intervention. This is a question of contested memory and remembrance. It is a question of how arts can deal with the contested and fragile character of memory in public space. I will now hand over to my colleague Rudolf Kaisler, who will guide us towards a third place of memory in Vienna.
So I'm going to give you some insight on the cemetery of the Nameless as a space of fragile memory. What is the cemetery of the Nameless? It is located in Albern. Albern used to be a very small village outside of Vienna and has been incorporated around mid-century of the 20th century. And a cemetery was founded there around 1840, we don't know for sure when exactly, by local fishermen who worked there, and next to a floodplain area of the Danube. It's exclusively near to the Danube, where bodies have been washed up again and again due to some kind of water vortex there between the stream kilometer 1918 and 1919. And it was closed in 1940 after the vortex disappeared and no bodies were found anymore due to a part of Danube regulation to build a harbor near Albern. And today it is within this harbor area of Albern, the Hafen Wien, it is called today. And where is it? So we are here right now in the main building of the University of Vienna. So that's the map of larger Vienna. And the cemetery is here. You see it's a very, very remote location next to the Danube stream. And this part is the harbor. And the cemetery of the Nameless is the smallest cemetery in Vienna. It only holds 102 graves. And the largest cemetery of Vienna is the Center Cemetery, Zentralfriedhof. And it is located here. You see this huge area, this green area, that's the Central Cemetery of Vienna. It's one of the largest cemeteries in Europe, I guess. And it's not so far away from the smallest one of Vienna. And they have a connection. I will talk about it later on. Today, it is part of the harbor of Vienna in Albern. And the harbor of Vienna also is the former landholder. So this cemetery does not belong to the church or to someone else. It belongs to a harbor society, harbor association. And it used to have other names as well, like cemetery at the Schneidegrund, which was the name of a local area there, or the cemetery at the Sauhaufen, the cemetery without a name, because it had no name at the beginning, and the cemetery of the drowned, or the cemetery of Albern. This name will pop up again in one of the protocols of the autopsy of the bodies. Yes, I told you about. So this is it from above. As you can see, today it's a highly industrialized scene. There's a harbor, and the old section, so the first section of the cemetery, which existed from 1840 to around 1900, was located here. And today it's just a plain field of concrete pavement, because some years ago the harbor decided to use this area. So the cemetery did not exist for 120 years there, and there was a need to use it on an economic basis, so they just paved it. And this is the new section that we have seen in the film, in this short clip of 2 minutes. And now it looks a little bit different than in the film. I've been there on Saturday to do some prep for this presentation, and I will show you some pictures briefly. And you see, this is the section where the graves lie, and it's very, very small. And there's a chapel on the ground that has the dedication to be a resurrection chapel. Yes. And yeah, as I've been telling you, the last burial occurred 1940. And after that, no bodies showed up. Because prior to the harbor, there was this vortex, but Vienna has had many regulations of the Danube, starting from early 19th century, and the largest one the last one has been in the 1970s, and there has been a regulation around 1870, and that maybe created this vortex, and after that a lot of bodies washed up there, and after the regulation of the harbor, it disappeared, so the vortex disappeared. All right, I think it's a space of fragile memory, and what do I mean telling you that? You see an object that is a fragment of a Corpus Christi that hung on a tree in the old section, so somewhere around here. It used to be a forest until the pavement, and this section had been abandoned around 1900, and back then they did not have the money to do exhumations and to move the bodies to the new sections, so they decided just to leave them there, so 487 graves, and they just gave it up and lost these bodies. And this object is the only testimony nowadays, it's the only piece of memory that is left of this old section. And before the harbor started the pavement of the ground, the caretaker, which will follow shortly, Josef Fuchs is his name, he saved this object and put it into the chapel, into a shrine, like as a testimony of this old cemetery. And this chapel is called Chapel of Resurrection. It was built 1935, officially to remember the fortification of a nearby dam. But if you look from above and you see the angles, it is kind of the chapel of the cemetery, although it has not been the official chapel of the cemetery. And it had no recognition or consecration from the Catholic Church by the time of the consecration. So when the chapel opened, the local bishop, Cardinal Initzer, showed up to consecrate the chapel, but he did not consecrate the cemetery. All right, and I believe there are actually 3 layers of fragility here concerning this space of memory. There's the fragility of the dead themselves. I'm going to talk about it shortly. It's the fragility of the surrounding space. As you have seen, it's a highly industrialized zone. And it's the fragility of memory and care through time. And I would like to give you short examples on all the 3 layers. So the first layer, the fragility of the dead. Who were they? There's a wide range of age, so from newborns to people in the 70s, and there's an accumulation between the age of 20 and 30 where most suicides appeared in this specific time. And the cause of death presumably mostly are suicides, but there are also victims of violent crimes, people that have been stabbed or beaten to death, and also victims of accidents. Someone fell off a boat into the Danube and drowned and washed up there. And the social status varies. It ranges from very poor people of bad health, you can tell by the description of the autopsies, up to people from upper classes, so, who wear good clothes and things like that. And in the new section, by now, around 60% of the people have been identified. Some shortly after their retrieval, because they had been reported missing by someone to local police, but some only also decades after that, due to the very precise description of the autopsies reports that I'm going to show you one example. And the rest, about 45 people, remain nameless. So that's why cemetery got the name Cemetery of the Nameless. And in the old section between 1870 and 1900, where most of the bodies were washed up the shore, around 90% of the bodies remained unknown. And it is not clear where the name Cemetery of the Nameless comes from, but probably it comes from a report in a local newspaper from the time. Like a reporter called it that way, and then so it became the name of the cemetery. I'll give you one example of one of the protocols. It's the 37th protocol from November 24th, 1926. I quote, "A newborn boy of unknown origin has been retrieved out of the Danube at 11 o'clock ante meridium at stream kilometer 1919. Cause of death not ascertainable. Birth approximately 4 to 7 days before retrieval. buried at the cemetery of Albern, so an old name of the cemetery, after autopsy under criminal investigation supervision on November 24th. So it's one of the unknown nameless bodies buried there. And you see that's a typical grave of a nameless person there. It's not this person because there has been formerly there had not been metal crosses but wooden crosses. And in the winter, I guess 1919 or 1920, there has been a theft of wood there because people were desperately seeking for material to get heating going on in their homes. And they stole it from the wooden crosses from the cemetery and burned them just to heat their apartments. And and after that, the knowledge of which person lies where got disturbed, and today we're not really sure about that. But as you to these autopsies, normally 3 persons were present at these autopsies. So there was the local policeman to rule out a crime. There was the local doctor to do the autopsy and find the cause of death. And there was the local coroner. And in the 1930s, one of them, so the local policeman, Josef Fuchs, he already had contact with the cemetery at the beginning of his teenage years, and he was the policeman and had to show up for these autopsies, and he felt deeply kind of linked to the place, so connected to the place. And the coroner, after that, he lost a family member due to suicide. It was a coincidence, and he stopped working because he was traumatized and said, "I'm not going to do my work anymore." No one was there in this local area to be the coroner, and Josef Fuchs, he decided to do it himself. So the policeman became the new coroner, and since then he cared about all the dead that washed up, about 50 persons in his time until 1940, and he buried them. Sometimes also retrieved them from the Danube and brought them there. And and he started a kind of a caretaker tradition in his family, which is very interesting. These are the current caretakers, so that's a picture from Saturday. This is Josef, another Josef, the third in line, and Rosita Fuchs, and they care about the cemetery since 2005. And they're the third generation of care within one family, starting with this grandfather I told you about, Josef Fuchs. And he has been the caretaker for almost 60 years. But there has also been a fragile moment because Josef Fuchs had to go to war, so he was a soldier of the Wehrmacht, and he went to Russia and became a prisoner of war. And he was away for, I think, 7 or 8 years. And during this time, nature almost took back the entire cemetery. So there are hardly any stones there, just wooden, small hills of earth. And when he came back in 1948 or 1947, he had to restore the cemetery from start, and he did it. But that was a fragile moment in the history of the cemetery. And they quoted. So he told me, Josef Fuchs on Saturday told me, other families have a Schrebergarten, which is a kind of allotment garden, and it's very famous in Vienna to have a Schrebergarten, a very small garden. We have a cemetery, so they say it's part of our family tradition to take care of this place. And then I asked them, what will happen if they already retired, but what will happen if you can you give it on to the next generation? And they told me if we cannot go on, our son Michael, who is now 45, I believe, will take over, and our grandchild Felix, who is 6 years old, is already interested. So you see, maybe there's a 4th and a 5th generation as well. So that's very astonishing, isn't it? So the caretaking of one fragile space of memory by one family and one family only, because the place belongs to the Harbor Authority. But the Harbor Authority is not very much interested. They provide, if a tree has to be cut down, they do that, and they pay for it, but they do the daily work without getting money for it since 85 years in this family. And there's also a kind of local commemoration there. The local commemoration is that there's once a year, there's a central memorial service on the first Sunday after All Saints' Day. including the launching of a raft with flowers and lanterns on the Danube, including a plate with the inscription "To all victims of the Danube," because after 1940, when the bodies stopped washing up there, they said, well, there are still bodies, but we don't know them anymore, so they don't come to us, so we have to invent a kind of memorial service to pay respect to them, a kind of floating cemetery, if you want to. And so they build a raft and they just push it onto the Danube in direction of the Black Sea. And and it's written in different languages, so that if it washes up somewhere in Hungary or so, they can just push it on. All right. And every first Sunday every month there is a Eucharist celebration in the Resurrection Chapel on the cemetery ground with a Catholic priest who also consecrated the cemetery some years ago without asking for permission. So he did not ask any church authorities, he just did it because he felt obliged to do it. And there is also a huge network of donators. So Josef Fuchs described it to me, donators of flowers, of crosses, of lanterns, of work time, of pewage from a nearby parish. There has been a flood in Austria, a big flood in 2013, and by the time the cemetery was underwater, I think 3 meters, and a lot of things were destroyed in the chapel too. So, and they had to build it up again, and it was donated to them. Josef Fuchs told me about one German guy who every year sends a package with 102 candles, large candles like this size, so for every grave every year. That's quite impressive. And and there's this Josef Fuchs Senior. He made contacts to local authorities and also to authorities of the Central Cemetery. And if the Central Cemetery is a very, very large cemetery, so I think there are 3 million people buried there. So more people than are actually alive in Vienna lie on the Central Cemetery. So the dead are always the majority in Vienna. And of course they have to dissolve a grave every year, or more than one, and if there is a cross that can be used again, they give it to this cemetery of the Nameless. So they have given it in the past, and this connection is still active. And there's also a nursery school of gardeners at the cemetery, and if they have leftover flowers or something, they pass it on and donate it. And they also send the apprentices to put it onto the grave. So they're really into it, yeah. And there's the Harbor Authority that provides for the most essential needs of the cemetery. All right, and there's this global commemoration due to this film, Before Sunrise, from 1995. Up from 1995, there's a kind of touristic visit of the cemetery as a film location. Starting from the 90s, I don't know, people from Asia came to Vienna and wanted to visit all the film locations. And this is a very remote location, but nevertheless they went there. And there is also a commemoration of families of German soldiers from the Second World War who went missing next to the Danube, somewhere in Austria, maybe around Vienna or somewhere around Linz or somewhere. And they come, so Josef Fuchs described it to me, they come to the place and they just choose randomly 2 or 3 graves of nameless people, because the dead buried there could have been maybe their relatives from the war, and they sing songs, they say prayers, and then they move on. So and they do it every year, so they come again every year. And of course there are newspapers, radio reports, TV documentations, publications, and so on. There's one academic publication that collected all the autopsy protocols and did groundbreaking work considering this place. All right. And I would like to end with a poem that is on a plate next to the central cross of this very tiny, fragile cemetery. And I translated it in English, so it doesn't rhyme in English, but it does in German. And I'm going to read it to you. When you seek rest and peace, you badly tormented hearts, far from the world that now seeks you, there is no pain here. Even if you lack modern graves and no candle calls you by name, you rest here in God's hand. In his peace, amen. And if once there will be a reunion, meanwhile enjoy the peace. He who once will call the resurrection will not forget you. Thank you.